Hello, my name is Carrie Brown and I am with the Central Mississippi Regional Library System. Today I'm going to be reading to you chapters 1, 2, and 3 of A to Z Mysteries, The White Wolf. Written by Ron Roy, illustrated by John Stephen Gurney, published by Random House, New York. Chapter 1. There he is! Shouted Ruth Rose. She pointed at the sky where a small seaplane was getting ready to land. Dink, Josh, and Ruth Rose were standing on a pier in Essex, Connecticut. It was a warm summer morning, and Ruth Rose was dressed in lavender from her headband down to her sneakers. Even her sneaker laces were lavender. "It's so cool that planes can land on the water," Dink said. His full name was Donald David Duncan, but everyone called him Dink. As the kids watched, the seaplane touched the top of the water. Small rainbows formed as water shot into the air. Then the plane piloted toward them. "I see Walker!" Josh said, waving at the plane. Walker was Wallace Wallace's brother. Wallace was a famous mystery writer. The kids had met her and Walker when they came to Connecticut. Then the kids had visited Wallace at her castle in Maine. Walker waved back and taxied the seaplane to the end of the pier. "Hi, guys," he said, grinning. "Ready to fly?" "We sure are," Josh said. He, Dink, and Ruth Rose grabbed their backpacks. "Hand me your stuff and I'll help you climb aboard," Walker said. A few yards away, Dink's mother tooted her car horn. Dink waved and watched his mother drive away. When the kids were all inside the plane's cockpit, Walker showed them how to fasten their seatbelts for the ride. "This will be a short flight," Walker said when the kids were all buckled up. "We'll be in Acadia National Park before you know it. Mount Desert Island is part of the park." "Cool," Ruth Rose said. "All right, here we go," Walker said. He taxied the seaplane away from the pier. In just a few seconds, they were airborne. "We'll be flying over the water the whole way," Walker said. "You should see plenty of boats. Maybe even a whale." The kids kept their eyes on the water as Walker flew north. They didn't see any whales, but they did see thousands of birds and lots of small islands. "We're over Maine now," Walker said about half an hour. "Mount Desert Island is right below us." "It really looks beautiful," Dink said. "Everything around is so green." "It's gigantic," Josh said. "It almost looks like a dinosaur's head with his mouth open," Ruth Rose commented. "Where's your cabin?" Dink asked. "Look right where the dinosaur's nose would be," Walker said. He pointed out the window. "See that little harbor? It's called Seal Harbor. Our cabin is about a mile from where I'll be landing." The plane zoomed down, then leveled off. A few minutes later, the kids felt the pontoons touch down on the water with a swoosh. Walker piloted the plane toward a long wooden dock. The kids saw their friend Wallace waving at them. Next to her on the dock was a smiling girl with long dark hair. She was sitting in a wheelchair waving. "Who's that with Wallace?" Ruth Rose asked. "That's Abby Wallace," Walker said. "Wallace's surprise for you." Chapter 2. A minute later, Dink, Josh, and Ruth Rose were standing on the dock with their backpacks. "I have to fly some fishermen and women to a camp farther north," Walker told the kids as he got back in the plane. "I'll see you guys tonight." "Hey, welcome to Mount Desert Island," Wallace called as she ran toward them. "Hi, Wallace," the kids shouted. Then each gave her a hug. "Grab your stuff and follow me," she said. Wallace led them up the dock and stopped in front of the girl in the wheelchair. "Abby, these are my friends from Connecticut, Dink, Josh, Ruth Rose," Wallace said, pointing to each of them. "Meet my daughter, Abigail. She likes to be called Abby, with an I." Josh stared at Wallace. "You never told us you had a daughter," he said. Abby laughed. "Mom just adopted me a few months ago," she said. "Abby's parents died a few years back," Wallace explained. "I heard about Abby from a friend, so I invited her and some other kids to the castle for Christmas." Wallace grinned at her daughter. "After knowing Abby for only an hour, I knew I wanted her in my life permanently," she said. "That is so awesome," Ruth Rose said. "How old are you, Abby?" "Almost 13, Abby said. "How about you?" "We're all almost 9, Dink put in. Josh shook Abby's hand. "Why are you in a wheelchair?" he asked. "I have spina bifida," said Abby. "What's that?" Josh asked. "Before I was born, when I was still inside my birth mother, my spine didn't develop right. Abby explained to the kids. "So my legs don't work. I have to use a wheelchair most of the time." "Well, now that you've all met, let's get home," Wallace said. "If I know these 3 kids, they're hungry." She started walking toward the parking lot. "Josh sure is," Dink teased. His stomach was growling so loud, Walker thought there was a wolf in the plane. "There are wolves on this island," Abby said. "I've seen them through my telescope." "Wolves?" Josh gulped. "Really?" Wallace stopped next to a red van. She clicked a remote which opened a door and lowered a ramp. Abby wheeled her chair up the ramp and into the van. "That's so cool," Ruth Rose said. Wallace unlocked the other doors, and the kids piled in. Ruth Rose and Josh sat in the rear with Abby, and Dink sat up front with Wallace. They drove along a road lined with tall pine trees. Through the branches, Dink caught glimpses of sky and water. After a few minutes, Wallace pulled off the road onto a bumpy driveway. "There it is," Wallace said, pointing to a long, shady cabin. She parked next to a flagpole flying an American flag. The low building nestled beneath sweet-smelling pine trees. Wooden steps led up to a roof deck that circled the entire cabin. Beside the steps was a ramp that sloped up to the deck. "I love your house," Ruth Rose said as they got out of the van. "It's so cool and quiet here." "I usually wheel myself up the ramp," Abby said, "but it's more fun to have someone push me." "I'll do it," Josh said. He guided the wheelchair up the wooden ramp with the others following. "Do you want to see the wolves?" Abby asked. "Where are they?" Josh asked. He looked around the deck nervously. "Over here," Abby said. She guided her wheelchair across the deck to a telescope. "Take a look, but don't jiggle it. I have it set right on the wolf's lair." Josh walked over to the telescope, squinted one eye, and peered into the lens. "All I see are rocks and bushes." "Keep looking," Abby said. "I saw the wolf just before Mom and I went to meet you guys." Josh kept his eye on the telescope lens. Suddenly he jumped back. "Holy moly!" he shouted. "What?" Dink said. He and Ruth Rose hurried to join Josh and Abby at the telescope. "I just saw a gigantic white wolf," Josh said. Chapter 3. Dink and Ruth Rose looked into the distant trees, trying to see the wolf. "All I can see are some rocks," Dink said. "The wolf is white, so she blends in," Abby said. "You need the telescope." Josh backed away, and Ruth Rose took his place at the telescope. "Oh my gosh," she breathed. "It's beautiful." "Can I look?" Dink asked. Ruth Rose stepped back, and Dink peered into the telescope. "I see it," he said. Suddenly they heard a wolf howling. Everyone jumped, and Abby started to laugh. "I recorded the wolf's voice," she said. She pointed to a small tape recorder on a table. Next to it was a box of labeled cassettes. Dink read a few of the labels: raccoons, frogs, crickets, squirrels, birds, chipmunks. "You recorded all these animal sounds?" Dink asked. Abby nodded. "It's my hobby," she said. "I've been trying to record seals, but they never seem to make noise when I'm around." "You have seals here?" Josh asked. Abby nodded. "A bunch of them live on a rocky island out there," she said, pointing toward the front of the cabin. "That's why this is called Seal Harbor." Abby replayed the wolf's howl. "It sounds lonely," Ruth Rose said. Abby nodded. "She could be lonely," she said. "She might miss the rest of her pack." "How do you know the wolf is a girl?" asked Dink. Abby grinned. "Because she has 3 babies," she said. "Let me see," Josh said. He put his eye to the telescope again. "I don't see any babies." "I've only seen them a couple of times," Abby said. Josh let Abby have another look. "The cubs are there," she said. "They're lying right next to the mother. Their white fur blends in with hers." Josh looked again. "Guys, I see them," he said. Ruth Rose, then Wallace peered into the telescope. They grinned and said, "Oh, aren't they cute?" When it was Dink's turn, he laughed out loud. The plump baby wolves were cuddled next to their mom, playing with each other's tails. "Who wants lunch?" Wallace asked. "I do," said Josh. Abby leaned over to a panel near the door and pushed a button. Immediately the door opened inward. "Cool, huh?" she said. "All the doors operate that way," Wallace said. "I bought this cabin because the previous owner was also in a wheelchair." The kids followed Wallace and Abby inside. The living room had a braided rug on the floor. All the chairs and sofas looked soft and comfortable. A stone fireplace took up nearly one wall. Shelves on both sides of the fireplace held books, board games, and seashells. To the left of the fireplace were wide glass doors with a view of the sky, ocean, and islands. "This place is awesome," Josh said. "Thank you. Come on, I'll show you where you're sleeping. Then we'll eat," Wallace told them. "Ruth Rose, would you like to share my room?" Abby asked. "You can have the top bunk." "Great. I'll follow you," Ruth Rose said. "You two have a treat," Wallace said to Dink and Josh. "Come on." She led the boys out through the glass doors. They followed her around to a different side of the deck. "Oh my gosh," Josh said. A tent had been set up right on the deck under the roof. Inside the tent were twin beds, a small table with a lamp, and a rug on the floor. "It was Abby's idea. She thought you'd enjoy falling asleep listening to the waves," Wallace said. "You might even hear the seals." "It's excellent," Dink said. "Thanks for going to so much trouble." "No trouble at all," Wallace said. "Get settled, then come back to the kitchen when you're ready." The boys entered the tent and chose beds. "Isn't this cool?" Dink said. "I guess," Josh said. "What's wrong?" Dink asked, emptying his pack onto his cot. "What if the wolves come up here?" Josh asked. "Or even bears?" "Wolves and bears don't eat people, Josh," Dink said. "Yeah, what do they eat?" Josh asked. Just then they heard Abby yell from the deck. "Mom!" she shouted. Dink and Josh pounded out of the tent and tore around the corner. They saw Abby sitting with one eye pressed up against the telescope. Ruth Rose and Wallace came running from the other direction. "What's wrong, honey?" Wallace asked. "Somebody took the baby wolves!" Abby cried. "Took them? What do you mean?" Wallace asked. "How can anybody take them?" "I saw it through the telescope," Abby insisted. "A man and a woman grabbed the puppies." Thank you. Be sure to tune in next week for chapters 4, 5, and 6. Goodbye.